Hey there, welcome to the Thriving and Wellness Podcast with Haley and Caitlin. This podcast is for women who are tired of just surviving and ready to truly thrive. It's time to reclaim your health and build trust in your body.
Join us as we myth-bust nutrition topics, tackle your mindset, and dive into the nerdy side of women's health. Just a reminder that this is meant for educational purposes only and is not meant to be used for medical diagnosis or treatment. Now let's jump in.
Hello and welcome back to the Thriving and Wellness Podcast. Happy Thursday. Our episode earlier this week, if you haven't listened to that, but the Motivational Monday was all about letting go of food rules. And so we're kind of expanding on that conversation and talking about intuitive eating, because letting go of food rules is part of the intuitive eating practice, intuitive eating principles. And intuitive eating, it's starting to sound weird. I'm already saying it so much, but there's an actual book, there's a process involved with it. It's definitely grown exponentially since it first came out. And I think you and I both know there's some positive things that have come out of it. And we utilize some principles, but we definitely don't consider ourselves intuitive eating dietitians. And so today, what we want to go through is, of course, if you're not familiar with it, talking about what this even is and what principles we might pull in, but where we see some potential downsides with this, especially with our clientele. So let's start off with, what is intuitive eating?
Yeah, so like you said, there is a lot of structure around it. I feel like oftentimes people think intuitive eating is just like being mindful about eating. It's so much more than that.
There's a whole certification, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's 10 specific principles of intuitive eating. So we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of that. But in general, intuitive eating is really making peace with all types of foods. So like we talked about on Monday, rejecting the idea that there are good and bad foods. There really is no morality around the foods that we're eating. And it really supports getting in tune with your body, which is we have talked about all season, and honoring what your body needs, and definitely focusing more on health and a positive body image, and really not having any focus on the scale or weight loss.
Yeah. I will say one thing I think that kind of gets lost on social media, at least with the intuitive eating stuff that I see, is even that focus on health. So it's so much online focused on the negative aspects of weight loss in the scale, which we'll get to, that I think we even lose sight of how nutrition can be so beneficial for your health. And yeah, so that's just my little thing that I've noticed with the online world. But I'm sure if you actually sat down and talked to an intuitive eating dietitian, they would say otherwise, or within their practice, they're discussing it differently with their clientele.
Yeah, there's so much more push again on social media for anti-diet and
Yes.
Pushing against that and diet culture than in support of health.
Yeah, and I think you and I have talked about this before, where I think so many people have been in this world of diet culture for so long. A lot of dietitians, and fortunately, especially dietitians, and a lot of times why we get into this field, have dealt with some sort of disordered eating or eating disorders. And so what I've seen is this pendulum swing over to never wanting to lose weight. All foods are fine in moderation. And then we have two extremes. And in my opinion, neither of them are really helpful for people. Sure, maybe the small subset of people, it could be beneficial, but for most people, living somewhere in the middle is really where it's at.
And it is just kind of interesting how our field of dietetics has changed over time. As I think of the older generation of dietitians, they do follow a lot of those food rules, and they didn't learn actual counseling skills in
Yeah.
their training. And so it's a lot of like, well, for this diet or to lose weight, you're supposed to eat this many calories and follow
Very
these things.
rigid.
Now go and do it. Whereas so much of what we do is like, let's help you reach these goals that you want to reach. And like, it's such a different approach. So I feel like there's that like older generation of dietitians, and then these intuitive eating dietitians, and there's all sorts of, we all practice so differently.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it too. Everyone, you're going to find connection with someone different. But when you were talking about that, I'm not sure if I brought this up before, but there was this older dietitian. She wasn't like old or anything, but definitely a different generation than me that I worked with at one of the clinics I worked at. And it was in an outpatient setting. So what that looks like, it's like a doctor's office and everything, and people are referred to the dietitian, so they would come meet us, and we, similar to private practice, we would meet on a regular basis and do counseling and everything. But there was this other dietitian that she was training me when I first started there, and I ended up taking over some of her patients. So I would see some of her notes, and like 80 to 90% of her notes, she would put the same snippet and same recommendations for everyone, like no cholesterol foods, focus on low fat, stick to this many calories. And it was very rigid. And when I looked at that, I was literally like, what are they supposed to eat? Like, because it was no cholesterol, low carb, all these food rules. And I wasn't even going to get into that with her. But when I would look at it, I'm like, no wonder people are confused. Like, you can't,
Right.
there's like 3 foods you could eat. You're literally stuck with chicken, rice, and broccoli at that point. And that's not going to be realistic for anyone, especially the population we were working at. But anyways, I've definitely seen that firsthand, that rigidity. And I'm sure there's still people out there that practice that way. And I think there are a small subset of people that strict, those strict rules can be beneficial in like a short-term thing, but moving forward and knowing how to practice and eat long term is really what's going to lead to that success.
Yeah, so thinking about intuitive eating, what are some of the like benefits that you see from it, or what are some of the principles that you feel like you use in practice?
Yeah, so we were talking about this, and like we said, there's like 10 different principles, and you're supposed to go through them or at least that's my understanding. Again, I'm not certified in this or anything. I've read the book and I know a little bit about it, but my understanding is you're supposed to go through them in order. So there's definitely aspects I pull in, but I don't follow that in order. There's people that need certain aspects at certain times versus others. So we don't always start at step one, which would be like rejecting the diet mentality, because there's not everyone we work with is deep in that diet culture world. So definitely like the top one I use, of course, is nutrition. So that's actually the last principle, which we'll talk about why we don't love that being last, but gentle nutrition is where they recommend you actually start to bring in some nutrition aspects of learning how your food's impacting you and how to nourish your body. And in my opinion, that impacts all those other things. So that's oftentimes where I'm starting, is focusing on the nutrition, because like I've said before, that aspect can be so empowering. That can help lead to more satisfaction and understanding your fullness and hunger more. And so I think that is really like the top principle. But of course, we bring in like challenging those food rules and things like that.
Yeah, I feel like, and I don't know the principles off the top of my head, but I feel
I
like
was cheating and looking at them.
I feel like one of the biggest things that I see in my patients and help work with them on is like not being fearful of certain foods, and then talking through how can you incorporate some of your favorite foods that are maybe not the most supportive of your health goals, and incorporate them in a way that is going to be better for you. So like if somebody loves ice cream, and they're like, oh, I don't even buy it because I can't have it in my house, but like I love ice cream, it's my favorite thing. I'm like, oh, I like ice cream too, and I want you to be able to enjoy that, because while food is nourishing, we also both totally understand how food can provide us nutrients for our body, but food can also be so beneficial for our brain and simply just like provide us happiness. And that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when we're using it in a reasonable amount of time. So then helping that person be able to have their ice cream and eat it too.
Yeah, which goes back to what we talked about on Monday, is challenging some of those food rules. And I think this is kind of where you practice or where you come from with this too. But I truly believe that knowledge can be power in these situations. So understanding where that food rule originated from, why you feel out of control around things like ice cream, why
Mhm.
you feel like you have so many intense cravings in the afternoon and evening. Probably because
Mhm.
you're not getting enough breakfast or eating breakfast at all or getting enough protein at breakfast, right? So understanding the nutrition aspect of how that could be impacting, like the physiological aspect of how that's impacting your fear of foods or cravings and things like that. I think
Mhm.
that I find that extremely fascinating, one, and two, very empowering for people to help challenge those food rules and understand, like, sure, a food might be high in fat, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad for you. Or a food might be low in calories, but doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy for you.
Yeah. Yep. Um, oh man. Oh, I lost my train of thought there for a second. I found it. Um, so like we said, we're not intuitive eating dietitians, and I feel like then the next step, like even beyond that, would be like an eating disorder dietitian. So like
Yeah.
I'm not going to see anybody that has an eating disorder. Um, but I do have people that will come to see me and they'll say things like, um, struggle with binging. And they'll like use those terms, and I do my best to be mindful. Like my radar is always on of like, is this person, do
Is
they
this
actually
truly?
have
Yeah.
an eating disorder? Do I need to refer them out? Um, but so often it's like you said, they're not eating enough at breakfast or just not enough in the day in general. And I'm like, well, no wonder you feel out of control by the end of the day. And your body's only going to want those simple sweets, because it's
Yep.
almost always
Quick
the sweet.
energy. Hmm.
Um, and and so then all we're doing is increasing what they're eating during the day. And they're like, oh my goodness, like I don't even want the ice cream at night. Like sometimes I do, but it's
Hmm.
not like this overpowering craving. And that's where I'm like, it's not that you had an eating disorder, it's that you
The
weren't
lack
fueling
of
your body.
willpower.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you can get to the point where you can have ice cream in the house. You can enjoy a serving of ice cream without feeling like you're going to finish the entire pint. Right.
Yeah.
So like, you can even have a few bites. And I promise that's possible for you.
Mhm.
Because I've been there where there's foods that, like, if I open the bag, it's going to be gone. But now I'm at the point where I feel much more in control for all the work that I've done. But
Mhm.
there are definitely things that we don't incorporate, or times when this would not be fitting for our clients either. And I think this really comes into play. And I don't know if it's just in the social media world that they're not talking about it or not, but one of our concerns, or I don't know what the other word would be, but one of the, yeah, concerns with intuitive eating is there is a time and place where a little bit more structure is actually necessary. So you and I never want people to sacrifice their relationship with food. We never want them to sacrifice their health, but there's times when, in order to prioritize the health, we do need to have more of that structure. So if there's specific conditions, certain gut things that pop up, even specific hormonal or hormone things that come up, there's a
Yeah.
time and place where we need to have, like, maybe not all foods fit in that time. Like maybe we need to focus on certain types of fats and limit alcohol, and we need to have more of that structure.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, even on the other end of things, like with certain gut concerns, eating healthier foods or like raw vegetables will totally trigger somebody's
Mm-hmm.
symptoms. And and I don't think like an intuitive eating dietitian is gonna say like you should go and eat these raw vegetables even though it makes you feel like crap.
Yeah.
Um, but it really gives off this mentality of like you should just be able to eat anything, and restricting any foods that you want is unacceptable. Where so often, I mean, these people that are coming to us, they're like, I don't know what I can and can't eat, and they need help putting together that structure and help in identifying what foods to incorporate and avoid. And sometimes that's really challenging for them mentally
Yeah.
because they want these foods, or these are their comfort foods, or um they want to go and enjoy pizza with their kids, but they know that that pizza is going to make them feel so sick. And so working through all of those emotions with them as they're, figuring this out, whether it's for the short term or for the long term.
Yeah. So there's two things that came to mind when you were talking through that. One, oh shoot, no, I totally lost that. No, one is I've heard stories of people, like, we keep losing our train of thought today. I've heard stories of people who have been in the diet culture world, been introduced to intuitive eating, and so they start to follow what, I'm not saying they're always working with someone, so maybe they're not going through it appropriately, but they start to implement some of these principles and they feel like they've rejected all these things or start eating whatever they want. And they're like, but I started to feel even worse. I'm feeling even more negative about my body. I'm feeling like physically run down. Things aren't, it's not serving me. Right.
Mhm.
And so that's where there's definitely a time and a place, or maybe just parts of it of like, okay, maybe we challenge some food rules, but we also realize what's going to be appropriate for you. And the other aspect of this, which I really have some beef with, is I don't think it's taking into account our current food environment. And so much of the food that people are eating are hyper palatable. And so what that means is it's designed for you to want more. It's designed for you to crave it, right? Food scientists are really good at their job. And
Mhm.
these foods that these large companies like potato chips, and they're combining all these different flavors that it's easy to eat a lot more, versus if you're having like a handful of almonds or like like a piece of fruit, you're probably going to stick with just like one serving because it's one flavor versus like 5 million. And so, okay, 5 million is exaggeration, but basically these hyper palatable foods are designed to make us to want to eat more. And so if we're just saying like, go out, eat whatever you want, there's going to be plenty of people that start to overeat. They're missing out on so many nutrients,
Mhm.
and of course, they're going to start to feel like crap because they're not getting what their body needs. So I think that's maybe where intuitive eating misses the mark a little bit, is considering these hyperpalatable foods. And again, intuitive eating dietitians might be like, no, we take that into consideration, but just based on what I see on social media and how it's talked about, and then how I see people practicing it,
Mhm.
that's something that I think gets ignored, and we can't ignore that with our environment because that's going to impact satiety and all these other things.
Right. Another piece that always frustrates me is, again, this is from what I see on social media, is they seem to always recommend 3 meals and 3 snacks a day.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Huh.
I always see that. And like even on some of the like questionnaires of like do you think this person has an eating disorder? That's one of the things. And if they're not eating 3 meals and 3 snacks a day, then they're like at a higher risk for an eating disorder.
That's interesting.
And that's way too much, in our opinion. I know we feel the same about that. I would say sometimes based off of people's schedules, I'm recommending 2 snacks a day, but more often I'm just recommending 1 snack in the day so that people are eating about every 3 to 4 hours, because that's what's optimal for blood sugar and gut health. And like, there's lots of things we have to consider here. And I feel like when you're eating 3 snacks a day, you're almost to the point of grazing, which is not good.
Yeah. I think there's a time and place for that, but for the majority of clients, no.
Right.
But like, to me, that feels like you're always eating. And there was a time when I was doing that because this is a food rule that came in for me. I was told like, you have to eat every 1 to 2 hours. And so I was literally, I had all these snacks lined out and I felt like I was just constantly eating. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things to consider here. So I think the biggest aspect that we have concerns with is the lack of nutrition aspect that's brought into it. So.
And the piece that gets so like polarizing between like our viewpoint about nutrition and health and somebody who's in the intuitive eating space is that because we help our clients focus on health and nutrition and
weight loss, sometimes.
Yes, that it's therefore like leading them to an eating disorder.
Yeah, because I do see people online talking about how like any time you desire weight loss, that's disordered eating, or anytime you're going to track your food, that's disordered eating. And that's not the case. Just because you want to lose weight, that doesn't mean you absolutely hate your body. It could almost be, or in many situations, it can be a form of respect to your body, because there's a time and place when weight loss can be really beneficial for your health. And I don't think we can ignore that. We can't ignore that, right? We know, we have research to know that excess fat or excess adipose tissue can be detrimental to our health. And so I think that's another place where we miss the mark. And it also doesn't mean that like if you're going to approach weight loss, if you're going to go on this weight loss journey, that doesn't mean that you have to go to the extreme, go down to 800 calories and sacrifice your health. And I know in our practice, that's of course never the route that we go. Health is always the top priority. And so, especially because we view weight as a symptom often of something else going on. So if we start to support your health, maybe we do need to focus on weight specifically with a slight calorie deficit. But if we're focusing on health or focusing on eating in a balanced way, oftentimes we see the weight start to trickle off.
Yeah. And you brought up like tracking and how so often intuitive eating dietitians feel that in and of itself is disordered eating. But I would definitely encourage you to go back and listen to the episode that we have on tracking, because there's so many different reasons why we would have our clients track their intake and how we use it to really allow them to become more in tune with their body and not just follow, I must hit this number of calories to lose weight.
Yeah. And the goal is never to have tracking be the only tool or have you track until you're 85 years old. Like, this is a temporary tool to understand how you're nourishing your body. And I've seen many situations where it leads to more stress. And that's, of course, when we back off. And we've talked about that in our past episodes too, but also many times when it leads to more empowerment and people understanding their body's needs because they have that record and that tool to help them build that.
Yes, absolutely. So I think overall, our focus is always going to be helping you support and nourish your body with health at the forefront, while also letting go of so many of these food rules, because those food rules often are not directly in support of your overall health.
Yeah, one thing I was just thinking of when you were saying that too is like intuitive eating doesn't click for a lot of people. Like a lot of people don't, if you're just saying like, oh, we eat intuitively, like they might massively undereat if they're just eating intuitively because they don't feel their hunger and everything. Or like I was talking about before, they might only gravitate towards those hyper palatable foods. Our physiology plays a part in it too. Our genetics, our gut health, how our gut hormones are, our insulin resistance, things like that. So I think we need to take all that into consideration when understanding how someone, like what someone's eating behaviors are going to be like, even if we just gave them free range to eat whatever. So in my opinion, it's not intuitive for everyone, especially with our current food environment. So I think this is something I just keep reiterating. Structure can be really powerful. And one other thing I wanted to say too, when it comes to the weight aspect and body image, on last week's episode, we talked mainly on body image, and our guest focused on body respect, body positivity. And I think that's a really good thing to listen to, because while she doesn't focus on weight loss, I think that's a helpful tool for someone who is wanting to lose weight, is that just because you want to lose weight doesn't mean you can't respect your body. Doesn't mean that you can't like love and accept where you're at right now and still move forward. All right, I think I've ranted enough. If you have any follow-up questions on this or really just want to continue this conversation, I'd be really interested in chatting with you. So reach out to either of us on Instagram at Dietitian Haley or Dietitian Caitlin. And I think this is the end of our season too. So we will, yeah, that went by so fast. So end of season 2, this is wrapping up. If you haven't listened to all the episodes, please go back and enjoy. Maybe there's a few that you need to hear a couple of times or revisit during different seasons of your life. But we will be back with season 3.